completely fine?
We're recording now. We don't know. Everything's fine.
It is okay? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks, Amanda. Yeah.
Okay, sure thing. I'm gonna go off camera while you all talk.
Okay.
But I'll be here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Can you talk about your earliest years? I guess the history says that you lost your mother at a fairly early age.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you were born outside of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Did you grow up there?
But grew up no, my dad was a priest and I was born in Chicago, actually in Maywood. And he was the vicar of a mission church, St. Simon the Cyrenian, in Maywood. And that church was merged with another Episcopal church in the town, which was predominantly white. And St. Simon's was predominantly black. And they merged. And when they merged, Daddy took a call to St. Philip's in Buffalo, New York. And I was maybe 3 when we moved. My sister was a baby.
Yeah.
And so I really grew up in Buffalo.
Mm-hmm. And you're the older of the two?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the 2 of us.
Okay.
I hope cousins, but the 2 of us, 1 sister and a million cousins.
Yeah.
And Daddy had 7 or 8. It's either 7 or 8 sisters and brothers. I lose track of the time. So there's a big family out there.
And I assume that church was very much a part of your childhood.
Yeah, I mean, it was again. This is the '50s, late '50s, and then the early '60s would be my formative childhood years, and that was still a world where there weren't a lot of secular recreational activities for kids. It was mostly church-centered. I mean, that was just generally true north, south, in Black communities in those days. Mm-hmm. So our religious life was obviously in church, but our life as kids playing and that kind of stuff really was about and around the church, because those were the buildings and the centers. Some of them had basketball courts inside, and that was kind of the center of community life in those days. Very different than it is now, but back then, churches were the centers of community life for I would guess most young people growing up.
Yeah,
there were parks and that kind of thing, but the civic life was built around churches, fraternal orders, and that kind of stuff, and even funeral. Baseball team I played on, Little League baseball team, was sponsored by one of the funeral homes. And on the back of your jersey had the funeral home's name. But that's just the way it was in those days.
Sure, sure.
So church was really a part, which in a funny kind of way helped me to think of church not so much as Sunday morning, but as a living reality 7 days a week. That it was very much integrated. Your faith life was integrated into your ordinary life. Mm-hmm. Theologians call that incarnational way of being, that it's in flesh. And that was the way it was. Now, again, I didn't think about that at the time as a kid, but looking back on it, I can see that was one of the gifts. And as a result, that church, that small congregation where I grew up, sponsored 6 or 7, I'd have to go back and really count, 6 or 7 young men and women who are now priests to the Episcopal Church.
Oh my goodness.
That congregation. Now, a couple of it, I'll retire it within the next 6 months. One of them just passed. He had retired. Another one is still serving in Texas. There's one in Annapolis. There's one in Baltimore. I mean, in Buffalo. Uh-huh. I'm missing somebody. But that's the impact and influence that congregation, that community actually had on those of us who were basically raised up in the church.
So when you say Cyrenian, so it must have been predominantly historically Black congregation.
Oh yes. Now my dad's church in Chicago, in Maywood, which is just outside of Chicago. Okay. That was St. Simon Cyrenian. The church in Buffalo was St. Philip's.
Oh, St. Philip's. You mentioned that earlier.
St. Philip's. Yeah. But again, you could tell if you trace with many African-American churches, All right, what Philip are we talking about? It was Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch
Yes, of course.
in the Acts of the Apostles. So you
Yeah.
can usually say, okay, that probably is a historically Black congregation.
That's right. That's right. That's right. You said it was a small congregation.
Well, ironically, when we were growing up, it wasn't. Those were days when, there were 3 masses and I mean, I don't know what the numbers really were. They looked like a cast of thousands to me, but I was a kid. But there were 2 priests, a rector and an associate or curate, as they called them in those days. There were always 2 priests. And I mean, it was a pretty large operation, but again, everybody Black lived in the same community. I mean, East Buffalo was Black. It was Black folk. And so people in those days could even walk to church.
Were Episcopalians and Black Episcopalians in those days considered exotic?
Oh yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah. There's always been jokes about us, of course. But what was interesting was growing up was St. Philip's and my father, the church was very involved in civil rights work in that community. And so even though I'm sure there were always the jokes about the Episcopalians, I mean, that was sort of especially among the preachers, there was a respect because that church took leadership and was very involved in community stuff. And there was a community center that operated out of it. It had a basketball team and I mean, I can't remember a drill. I forgot what it was called, a drill team or something like that. Softball teams. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff that was going on in this one church. And again, it was a different time because that was a time when everybody who was Black lived in East Buffalo.
Yeah.
You didn't have any choice about that. And so you had a concentration of people and St. Philip's, as with other churches in those days, Baptist, AME Zion, Presbyterian, I mean, all of the United Church of Christ, all of the Black churches in the area were pretty large-sized operations in those days. Now, that's not all true today.
Right.
I mean, a few mega churches, but I think we're all a little smaller than we once were.
Yeah, it kind of grieves me in a way. I always say that Black Episcopalians are not many, but we do punch above our weight.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yeah. That's very true. Yeah, no, not many, but punch above our weight. And that's always been true. I mean, that you even go back to the 19th century. And that was true then. Now, it was a little bit different during slavery because you had the numbers of Black Episcopalians were linked to whoever the slave master was, and a lot of them were Episcopalians. And so the slaves got counted in with them, but that was artificial. As soon as emancipation happened, there was emancipation from the Episcopal Church too. And the numbers just folk just went everywhere at that point. But no, we've always been small. And actually the Episcopal Church in this country, just in the US, I mean, it's different around the world when you look at global Anglican. I think it boomed up to about 3 million in the 50s during the boom years when all churches were kind of booming and so were coming back from World War II and the GI bills, and so things were getting built and people were having families and babies and that was true for Episcopal churches. All the mainline churches were growing and building new buildings and that kind of stuff. That stopped. That plateaued in the 60s and then began a slow decline, late 60s, early 70s. And so we're part of the trends of the culture, and the number of Black Episcopalians has been relatively small. I don't know what the percentage has been. Now, if you're in New York and if you're on the East Coast, where you have Caribbean influence, there you'll find greater numbers.
And historically, Black congregations are large and have become populated by
they're still large
community.
Yeah, they're still large. You go up to Brooklyn and Long Island and
in Washington, here in Washington, D.C.
You're in Washington. Yeah, in Washington. So that's still true. Although the further you get in the generations, less attachment is, you know what I mean? That's just a natural kind of thing.
Were you a typical preacher's kid?
I don't know what a typical one would be.
Okay, all right, here we go.
What would that be?
Were you somewhat puckish in behavior, or were you well behaved and devout?
No, I wasn't well behaved and devout,
Okay.
but not completely puckish. Somewhere in between. I was a good Anglican. I was right in the between
Okay.
those two. Oh yeah, there was a little bit of what was it? A little bit of troublemaker in me,
Mhm.
and a little bit of a good kid in me too. I was a good mix.
When did you know that you would want to pursue ordained ministry?
Well, when I was a little kid, I would imitate my father. So you would,
Yeah.
as a little kid. And then after a certain point there, I wasn't really thinking about it, and it didn't really resurrect for me in a serious way until I was midway through college. And I remember taking a course. Oh gosh, I think the title of the course was Prophetic Religion. And we were reading a number of things. I mean, stuff by Herbert Marcuse and people like that. And uh, and we read some writings of King, writings, not sermons, but some of the writings. And I've thought back, I said, well, wait a minute now, there's something here. This is social change. Because I was leaning toward following your path, possibly going to law school and doing public service. I mean, I had no question I was going to do public service of some kind.
Yeah.
Just a question of what shape was it going to take?
Mm-hmm.
But when I read this, I really started to think, maybe my path is in ministry. And maybe that's how I can be a part of the social change that I think has to happen. Maybe that's how I'm a part of it. And anyway, and that began a journey.
And this is at Hobart and William Smith?
This is at Hobart and William Smith. Yeah.
No, why'd you go to Hobart and William Smith?
Well, to tell you the truth, I hadn't heard of it before, but there was a woman in our church, Erna Clark. And she was now gone on to glory. She was like the head of the Sunday school. I mean, the church Sunday school was organized like a public school. I mean, it had a superintendent, it had a board. I mean, it was really incredible. Anyway, Miss Erna Clark knew me from, a little kid. And when I was in high school, I was kind of just looking at colleges and really didn't have any particular, school in mind. And she said her son, who had gone there, and again, she was Black, had gone there in the early 60s, I believe, when there weren't many Blacks there at the time. But he had a good experience. And Miss Clark knew me well.
Yeah.
She said, I think you'll like it there. So she took me up, we drove up there, only about 2 hours from Buffalo. And we drove up there. And I looked around, I said, man, this place is really cool. I mean, all this grass and trees. I mean, it didn't look like Buffalo. I mean, I said, this is something. And I just fell in love with the place. And next thing I knew, applied and I got in. They gave me some money, and had 4 really good years. And it was a professor there, a guy named Richard Heaton, who's again now gone on to glory too, who was teaching that course in prophetic religion. I think I took it my sophomore or junior year. I can't remember.
And what were those years, Bishop?
I graduated in 75, so it'd be what, 71, 75?
71 and 75. They were yeasty, what I call yeasty years in American history.
Yeah, they really were.
Yeah.
I think I was in the last draft that for whatever reason, I don't remember now, but whatever reason, we didn't get called up because that would have detoured me a little bit. Because my number was low enough that I would have, but Nixon didn't call up that draft.
That's right.
72 or something thereabout.
That's right. That's right. Well, a little bit earlier, I had a low draft number too. Were you active in the local church or in Geneva, New York? Isn't it Geneva?
Yeah, in Geneva. That's right. It's in Geneva. Yeah. Not particularly, at least not early on. In fact, I'll never forget when Daddy and Grandma came for Parents' Weekend. And Daddy said, of course, so what time is church? And I sort of dived around and So I think it's about 11 o'clock. And it was. I lucked out. I guessed well. And I did check to make sure, but I guessed well. And so we went, and the coming out after service, Daddy greeted him and Grandma greeted the chaplain, and Daddy said, "I guess you know my son." And the chaplain said, "No, I don't believe we've met." I said, "Oh man, I'm busted."
Oops.
We all laughed. He laughed, and Daddy and Grandma laughed. They didn't, they didn't push us that at all. But and the chaplain then he became a critical player later when a vocation was beginning to bubble up.
What do you mean by that?
He became somebody I could talk to.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
He became a conversation. I was sort of like Nicodemus going to Jesus by night, just sort of catch him out on the quad and start a conversation. And it was those kinds of conversations that eventually, I don't know. So this may have been in my junior year, I guess, when this was going on.
Now, was there a gap between the time that you got your undergraduate degree and moving on to Yale?
No, I went from one to the other.
Okay.
Right from one to the other. I think I was in that last group where they started having planning a gap between, so people would go and work. I was in the last group where they would let people go from college to seminary. And the idea, the intention later on was certainly good, but the real net effect was that people went off and found other careers.
Of course.
And sort of came back later in life. Some came back later in life.
Yeah.
But it was one of those experiments, ways of trying out. And but I was before that happened, right before that happened.
Did you enjoy seminary?
Yeah, I really did. I enjoyed college and seminary, but seminary was really, it was the first time I was steeped in something that I wanted to give my life to. I mean, in college, I wasn't so much thinking about giving my life, you know what I mean? It was very different. I think if I had decided I was going to law school, I would have steeped myself in that, whatever it was. But it was clear when I went to seminary, I knew why I was there. And that it was just, it was like being at a feast of food. I mean, I wish I could go back now, but it's too late. I'm too old now. But I tell you, I wish I could be there now. Just a remarkable experience, both in terms of the academics and in terms of the spirituality that was in the water. Henry Nouwen was teaching classes in spirituality back then. Just remarkable. And then I had good parish assignments, field work assignments. Those were experience. It was a different experience for me in the sense that, this wasn't my home church.
Yeah.
This was a different, and I had a different role. I was a seminarian.
Yes.
Both were really good. One was at St. Luke's in New Haven, which is it's primarily West Indian, a huge church. It was in those days. I don't know what its size now is, but back in there, it was still a large church. And in fact, W.B. Du Bois was baptized at that church in, I don't know, 1902 or something. I don't know.
My goodness.
But way back when.
Yeah.
And so I was there for 2 years. And then John Burgess, who was the bishop of Massachusetts, had retired, and he was at the seminary kind of doing practical theology and kind of a coach and mentor. Was a real mentor for me. He said, now you need to go somewhere different for your third year.
Okay.
And I said, so where is that? And so I ended up at St. Paul's, New Haven, which wasn't a predominantly Black church. It was a mixed congregation, but it wasn't predominantly Black. And Arthur Walmsley, who later became Bishop of Connecticut, was the rector then, and Ike Miller, who's retired now in Philadelphia, was the and that was an experience of a very different way of being an Episcopal congregation. St. was very similar to what I knew at St. Philip's, and that's what Bishop Burgess was saying. He said, "You know this world instinct. You grew up in it."
Yes.
But St. Paul's was just very different. Uh, George Bush's aunt went to that church. I mean,
Okay.
it was, you know what I mean? It was just a
Yeah.
very different world. And
Mhm.
Burgess said you need to experience the fullness of the church,
Mhm. Mhm.
not just what you're used to, but the full.
Mhm.
And he was right. He really was right.
Did you
And
enjoy it?
yeah, I
Yeah.
really did. And
Yeah.
yeah, enjoyed it. And it was just different. I just had to, just kind of learn it was, you didn't get Caribbean food at the church festival, so you didn't, no rice and peas and all that kind of stuff. You weren't gonna get that, but we got carrots and celery and that kind of stuff. And so it was different in that. But what I did learn was church is church. When it's real, church is church.
What do you mean by that?
It's everybody on the same quest.
Okay.
That ultimate quest to be in union or communion with the source of our life.
Okay.
Um, I think that's the source of the religious quest, to be in some sense of, well, Howard Thurman did say it this way, that to be in communion with the very source of our life itself. It is like the yearning for your mother. And that yearning is deep. And we don't always get it right. We try to find substitute ways for that. But Thurman used to say, deep is the hunger. And there are a lot of different ways to say it, but and that's not an ethnic thing. That's not a nationalistic thing. That's
It's
not
human.
It's human, exactly. That poet says, the hand that made us is divine. There is that spark in us, the imago Dei, the image of God is a part of who we are. And our hearts are restless till they rest in thee, said Augustine. And he was right. And so I got to experience that in a different context at St. Paul's, and in the years since then have, come to realize that we're on the same quest. Different ways to get there sometimes, but on the same quest.
When did you first realize that you were truly on your path? You were on your way to whatever, on that journey, not looking at a destination, but on the journey, on the
I
straight and
think when I
narrow.
was in seminary, by that time I was clear that, certainly after the first year, I was clear that parish ministry was where I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that I wanted to be in urban context. And at that point, I was assuming I'd be in a Black congregation. I mean, there weren't a lot of options. St. Paul's was an anomaly, an
Yeah.
early anomaly, but and so I just assumed that I'd be in some urban Black community somewhere, in a parish, and that's what I wanted to do. So it was while I was in seminary that got crystallized for me a lot. And both the experience at St. Luke's and St. Paul's in very different ways helped to shape that. St. Luke's in terms of experiencing that way of being in a church similar to the one I grew up. St. Paul's in a very different way, but similarly committed to the urban world, and committed to life in the city,
Mm.
and ministering in the city. You see what I mean? So it kind of, looking back on it now, I can see it was kind of crystallizing in me. I was clear about what I wanted to do. Where I would do it would be another question. That would have been on, deployment and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But
And New Haven had its urban challenges at the time.
oh yeah, it was
Yeah.
bustling with real urban challenges. I don't know if it is today. I just don't know, but it was a city with all of the city.
Yeah.
Once you were off that Yale campus,
Mm-hmm.
you were in city,
Mm-hmm.
and you knew it.
Yeah.
And,
When did you when do you think you began to find your preaching voice? Bishop, you're a Black preacher.
I mean, I guess that came. Some of that got nurtured at YDS, at Berkeley, Yale.
Mm-hmm.
when I was there, because one of the reasons I wanted to go there, and my bishop, God bless him, he let me convince him to let me go there. One of the reasons I said, I really grew up in the Episcopal Church, and I didn't expect that I'd spend lion's share of my ministry simply in the Episcopal Church. But if I was in Black communities, I was going to be in ecumenical context. I mean, we hadn't even thought about interfaith yet. That wasn't on the mental horizon yet. But I knew that's where I would probably be. So it made sense to be in an ecumenical environment to do theological training and formation.
Mhm.
And the nice thing about Berkeley, yeah, it had that strong Anglican and Episcopal stream in it. So
Yes.
excuse me, so you got that there. And so that kind of, about your question actually was, but that kind of milieu where I was really being steeped in a very ecumenical environment, I was impacted by people studying for ministry, especially Black clergy,
Yeah.
for whom preaching was the center of their lives. That was not the case in the Episcopal. You see what I'm saying? I mean, you lived or died on preaching. And so that got something stirring in me that elevated the preached word and its significance and centrality. I don't know that would have happened in a different context. I just don't know. But I know it did there. Preaching was it really was, and it wasn't just the Black clergy there. That the whole homiletics department that was there then was really, because again, it was heavily endued with the Protestant tradition.
Sure.
And so classic Protestant tradition. So you
Yeah.
had that emphasis on preaching that was just, it was palpable.
You know, and I think of it as a muscular tradition.
Oh, no question, no
Yeah.
question. We were in you had these classes where you had lectures on preaching and the history of preaching and all that kind of stuff, and then you would break out into labs and they brought in various preachers. Jim Forbes came at one point, people like that. So they brought in people to do the labs who were in the area that could get on the train and come on up. And I was in one, which was a number of the Black seminarians then, not all, but or not just Blacks, but a number. Was a guy named Bill Kennedy, who was Amy Zion in Philly. And Kennedy would tear you apart. He really was rigorous. I mean, he was rigorous, and maybe vicious is the right word. I mean, he really was. But he was a master at preaching. I remember one sermon he preached. Now, I've been ordained 45 years. He preached a sermon from the book of Job. When the sons of God came before the Lord, Satan was there also. Oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, I was just falling in love with I said, oh my God, there's something here. There's something. So that, I think, got it triggered. I mean, that got it triggered. And then probably in my second congregation, my first congregation was in Winston-Salem.
Yes, I know.
And my wife and I moved from Winston-Salem to Lincoln Heights, Ohio, which is just north of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
There's suburbs around it, but Lincoln Heights was, it still is a predominantly Black community. It's like kind of like 1 square mile actually, or something like that. And so I served there for a number of years and had incredible years. I've been blessed everywhere I've served. But while I was there was still that congregation. Bishop Burgess had served there in the 30s, and he said that the community there was a settlement folk coming up in that great migration from South, rural South, to the urban North. And some folks stopped off in what became Lincoln Heights.
Okay. Just above the river.
Just above the river, but above Cincinnati itself too, a little bit further.
I got it. Okay.
And so that, he said then it was, there was no public education for the children. It was just a Black settlement. And the community of the Transfiguration, the Episcopal convent there, basically started engaging that community. The long and short of it is they started a school for the kids because there was no education for children. So they started St. Simon's School, St. Simon's Church, St. Monica's Center. I mean, so they just built a whole ministry there. And John Burgess came there in the 50s as the priest, which was the first time they actually had a black priest come.
Yeah.
That's the 30s. Well, he was still living. Again, I had met him in seminary, and he had been a mentor. And I remember him come. I had him come up just to spend a week. He was retired, to come up and spend a week, and we go around and meet folk and do all that kind of stuff. And at some point, I remember him telling me, he said, when he was there in the 30s, he said the kids could read because they were in school, but he said most of the adults could not read. They were not literate. Now think about that, being in an Episcopal church with a Book of Common Prayer, and this is the 1928 Book of Common Prayer, and you can't read. Now, he said people would hold the books, but he said that was because they had memorized the Mass. They knew the whole, it didn't have changing, you know what I mean? It was not like it is now. It was just one thing. If you heard it enough, you learned it. And he said people would hold the prayer book. He knew they couldn't read, but people would hold the prayer book. And, when I was there, I'm aware of 2 women, and there may have been a third, I never knew for sure, who were probably semi-literate at that point. And both of them did domestic work because there were wealthier suburbs around us. And one of them was still doing domestic work because Social Security isn't enough. God bless Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It's something, and something's better than nothing, but it's not a lot.
Right.
And I remember never knowing for sure how literate this woman was. And yet I knew I had to speak to her on Sunday morning. And I had to speak to the PhD and MDs.
Yes.
Who were children of that generation. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Who were also in that same congregation.
Yes.
And that congregation, in that context, forced me to figure out, how do you effectively communicate the word of God to multiple constituencies and congregations all sitting in the same room? And I think that church forced me to find a way to communicate effectively, because I had to do it. I mean, literally, there were people in the congregation sitting there who were semi-literate, probably.
Right.
And there were PhDs and MDs sitting in the same church.
Yeah.
And you had to preach. And Miss
There was more than a handful of them, I bet.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
let me ask you another question. Before you got to north of Cincinnati, you were in Winston-Salem. One of my friends, may he now rest in peace, is Togo West.
Oh, Togo. Oh, yeah. Togo.
Yeah, right. And his mother was your church organist, wasn't she?
She was my church organist. Yes.
Evelyn Carter West.
Yes, sir. Oh, she was something.
Oh, yeah, poor Gail.
Yes, she was something else.
She was.
But I was just going through some old books, and she gave me a copy of, because I would often quote spirituals.
Yeah.
And she gave me a copy of the Hampton Spirituals.
Oh.
It was her copy.
Oh.
And she gave it to me when I left.
She loved you.
Yeah, she did. I
loved you.
I feared her, but I loved her.
Yeah. No, but she loved you.
Oh.
And Gail would say to me all the time, she said, my mother-in-law loves him, so he must be fine.
Yes, because Evelyn Carter West was something. She would say, Father Mike. And I'd say, Mrs. West.
Now, when did you, let me, exercise the privilege of the presider here and say that, Bishop, you have a prophetic voice. When did you first feel that prophetic voice was you and yours, and that you owned it, or that you were led by it?
I think that emerged more when I moved to Baltimore.
Tell me.
Because again, in Lincoln Heights, I was beginning in Winston-Salem. Yeah. So those early formation.
Yeah.
In Lincoln Heights, again, that was a Black community. You see what I mean? and Baltimore, St. James, was an urban community
Mhm.
where the seeds of injustice were so clear.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And there were no buffers around it.
Yeah.
And I think Baltimore forced me to come out more and try to make the connections between the eternal word of God and our transient life, our mortal life right now.
Yeah.
Where do those meet? And I just he had you hard preaching there. I mean, Baltimore, one time we had a service. I want to say it was a seven last words, and because it was Good Friday, and I got some folk to come in and preach. We were all preaching. Somebody said the preaching that day was so good, cockroaches got saved, and Baltimore was a preaching town, and and yet it was a town. It still is, I think, a town, a place where the preaching must engage the life of the city.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it doesn't engage the lives, it doesn't live.
Yeah.
And that's where whatever prophetic voice I have or have had to come out. It was just forced. You couldn't not unless you're just ignoring. I mean, it was we for example, give you an example where St. James is located. I don't know what I don't know. They probably still do it. We finally had to move the Christmas midnight mass to 7:30.
Yeah. 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 But almost all of us are doing it now.
Yeah, we had no choice. And
Yeah.
that was back in the
Because
80s.
people were too afraid.
Yeah, and with good reason. Because I mean, we had a security ministry, a whole team of guys, and you just had to do it if you were going to stay in the city. And I believe we needed to stay in the city, but we needed to make it safe. And so you had guards watching cars and all that kind of stuff. And for folk who walk to church, at least they could walk in safety and all of that. And but so in that kind of context, you better reread Amos.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? You pay attention to those old prophets.
Yeah.
Read a Jeremiah. Don't get depressed. Just read Jeremiah. He can depress you. but
Oh, I tend to be inspired by Jeremiah. Yeah.
oh yeah, how lonely sits the city
Yeah.
that was once full of people. I mean, the Lamentations. I mean,
Mhm.
that stuff came alive.
Yeah.
And a touch of prophecy is a necessity. Now, I don't mean feigned prophecy, but a touch of prophecy is which is to speak the word in season, which is fully into its context.
It's how you define it.
Oh yeah.
Speak the word in season.
In season. And out, but speak it into that context. And then that becomes prophetic. I mean, that's what prophets did. And it just, and so I've learned something. Every congregation, and in Winston-Salem, I took community organizing training and learned that from the NAACP.
Yeah.
As in Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
I mean, every parish that I've served honestly, it taught me more than I gave, I think. I've been blessed over the course of my ministry. And
you, how did you discern? I hope it's not too personal a question. How did you discern your call to become bishop in North Carolina, which I think came right after Baltimore, didn't it? Didn't you leave St. James?
It did. That's right. Yeah. You're right. That's right. Well, I hadn't thought about it. I figured if I left Baltimore, I'd go to another church. But there's a part of me that I could stay here and keep doing stuff, keep building. We'd start a development corporation and that kind of stuff. I mean, there would be enough work and ministry to do that I could have stayed there till retirement. Hopefully not gotten stale, but could have been there till retirement. And I remember when the letter came from North Carolina, inviting me to, or asking if I would be interested. Somebody had suggested my name and if I'd be interested. I remember reading it and just sort of say, look, North Carolina is not about to call Michael Curry to be the Bishop of North Carolina. I mean, I served there as a youngster, but that's just not going to happen. And so I think I left it on the desk and just didn't even say anything. Well, my administrative assistant saw the letter, Miss Lenora Savage, and she's now died and gone on to glory. She saw the letter and stuck it in my bag and called my wife. So when I got home, Sharon, who is from North Carolina, that girl was wanting to get back home in North Carolina. It wasn't no theology or spirituality. Like, she just wanted to get back home. Anyway, I got home. She said, "You get a letter from North Carolina?" I said, "What letter?" I said, "Yeah, I got a letter. Yeah, I'm not paying attention to that." And she said, "Give me your bag." So she pulled out the letter. I said, "Miss Savage," and put that letter in the bag. And anyway, she said, why don't you put your name in?" I said, "They're not going to elect Michael Curry bishop." And anyway, so I filled out whatever I had to fill out and put it back in, and became a candidate, a nominee, and was elected. It took 11 ballots. It literally took 11 ballots. But see, North Carolina, and like a number of dioceses, especially some dioceses, have a higher threshold for election of a bishop. It's not just a majority in both the clerical and lay orders. It's the majority in the lay order present, but the majority of clergy eligible to vote, which means it's a super majority.
I see.
It makes it, which is why sometimes it takes longer to elect somebody.
Yeah. I've during the course of this, just as an aside, a number of white parishes, inspired by you, by the way, have begun to examine their race histories.
Oh, yeah.
And so our collection has been coming in over the transom, almost overwhelming number of white parishes who have written their race histories.
Sure.
And among them is St. Paul's in Wilmington.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which is a fascinating story.
Yeah.
But they've done remarkable work. But aside from that, now, how old were your daughters when you moved to North Carolina? Back to North Carolina. Well, not back. Back to North Carolina.
Back, Elizabeth would have been about 7.
Wow.
I think that's right. And Rachel, they're 10, so Rachel would have been 17. Yeah, so Rachel was in school.
Yeah.
But Lizzie was in school too, only it was elementary school.
Okay. They weathered the change well, I could take it.
Well, the little one, they go where you go. The older one was a little bit more difficult. That was uprooting for her, because Baltimore was pretty much, I mean, she remembered Lincoln Heights, but she was a little kid then.
Yeah.
Baltimore is where she cut her teeth. But she was away at school part of that anyway, so she adjusted pretty well.
Where'd they go to school, to college?
Rachel went to University of Maryland. Oh, Lord have mercy. On the coast, on
West Coast?
Right on the Atlantic. I mean, on the Lord have mercy, I paid all that money. University of Maryland is historically black, HBCU.
Oh, Hampton.
I don't know why. Not at Hampton. Go up north, go up further up the back. I don't know why I can't remember the name of that school. I sent them money. University of Maryland.
It'll come to us.
It sure will.
Yeah, it'll come to us. Did you enjoy being bishop?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I didn't enjoy everything. I mean, life doesn't work that way, but no, I had good years here. I mean, I've had a blessed ministry as a parish priest, as a bishop, and even as a presiding bishop. I really have. I learned here. I mean, we still live in Raleigh, but I learned how to speak more broadly because I had spent my parish ministry times in Black communities
Okay.
where the language of the gospel or biblical language is part of the language of commerce in the communities anyway.
Correct.
And so you can speak that language and it doesn't connote, you can speak in religious metaphor, even in secular context, and people get it. At least a generation ago, people would get that and would not necessarily see that as religious fundamentalism. It's the way Black preachers talk. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden, when I became bishop, I was speaking to wider constituencies, not just in Black communities that communicated that way, but now in historically white communities, in Latino communities. I was actually having to have a personal Pentecost and figure out, how do I effectively communicate the same gospel with language that actually communicates. And one of the things that we did, Riley, you still there?
Yeah,
I think,
I'm sitting and thinking. Go ahead.
yeah. No, I thought you had frozen for a second. No, I'm sorry.
No. Yeah, I'm frozen. I'm stunned.
Yeah, it was the first, what John Burgess back in seminary wanted me to grasp when he when he encouraged me to go to St. Paul's, came true when I became bishop of North Carolina. I had to learn how. I had a teacher in high school. It was a guy named C. Reed Saunders, and he was taught English literature, and he often said that we must learn how to be multicultural, is what he called it. Now, this is back in the 70s, he was saying that. And so we had to read Langston Hughes and William Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you must be conversant in both.
Yeah.
That became profoundly true for me when I became bishop of North Carolina.
But see, when I hear you preach, and I think the first time I actually heard you preach was at your installation service.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But see, I think that you have brought the larger church to the Black tradition.
Oh, I think so. I hope so. Yeah.
And voice.
Sure.
And cadence and rhythm. And fervor. And passion.
Yeah, I hope so. And and like I said, it's what I discovered and knew was what I said earlier, that the heart's yearning, the soul's deep desire, transcends ethnicity. It transcends politics, transcends social, economic. In Christ, there is no east, no west, in him no south, no north. One great fellowship of love throughout the whole wide. That's the real deal. And when you get there, oh man, when you get there, hearts start to sing together, and lives can be made anew together, and new creation becomes possible. And I learned that here in North Carolina. You know what I mean? So my preaching evolved even differently here. Because I had to have a personal Pentecost. I said, you see what I mean? How do I declare this good news in a way that folk in different contexts?
But we're all fundamentally human. It's the human condition. And that's where you touch.
Yes. And if you miss that, you missed it. The word must become flesh and dwell among us. That's what's got to happen, both in the preaching and in the living. But
the great gift that you have given, listen, pardon my preaching to you.
Oh, listen to you. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Riley.
The great gift that you have given is the gift of the articulation of love.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Because that's
the fundamental message.
Yes. Yes, very much. It is the fundamental. It is the core. It is, and I've always known that, or, almost assumed it, I guess. Maybe that's a better way to say it. But I've got to tell you, it became more profound. It emerged to some extent in the congregations that I served,
Yes.
Realizing that some of the pain of Howard Thurman, I mean, yeah, Thurman, book, Jesus and the Disinherited. And in that book, he does say that the struggle of the disinherited is to understand that they are disinherited in the world, but not in the eyes of God. And once you grasp that, then you can go back and navigate the world if you see what I'm saying. But if you get confused about that, then you're immobilized. I mean, you just. And what I was seeing over and over again, which I knew growing up, but I saw it as through a pastor's eyes, was lives of the disinherited being exercised out of a disinherited context and enslaved to it. And in particular among children. And you could see it in struggles of children in school. You could see it in behavior and dysfunction. And it was true to some extent in Winston-Salem, but it became very clear in Lincoln Heights. I mean, we started Saturday Sunday school because Sunday wasn't working. So we started Saturday and had half a day. You just had to keep getting adult volunteers, but we got them. And did that as a way of reinforcing in young people their worth, their calling, who they are.
Okay.
And that expanded in Baltimore, the after school academy and all sorts of stuff, focusing on kids who, if I said, it was Jesse Jackson used to say, you may live in the ghetto, but the ghetto does not have to live in you. That's the difference. And we had to figure out how do we help young people to understand you may live in this ghetto, but this ghetto does not live in you and does not define you. How do you find a life that is transcendent, that is bigger than that? Don't forget where you came from. Don't get all highfalutin. But how do you transcend and grow beyond? And that became the focus of our work in Cincinnati. I mean, in some extent in Cincinnati, but really profoundly in Baltimore. That I don't remember what your question was, but that became a way of love, a work of love. That's where I started to articulate, you shall love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. That third leg of the stool, love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself. And that became, that's where all three of them were important, but that one became dominant. I said, because if you don't do that, you probably won't do the other two.
But but I've seen people who are also prisoners of privilege.
Oh, yeah.
Who don't see that they are not privileges. They don't have to be privileges of privilege. I mean prisoners of privilege.
Yeah.
People from Scarsdale, New York, and Shaker Heights, Ohio.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. But the reality is we are all mortal. No matter how immortal we pretend to be, we are all mortal. And why do we need to play that game and pretend to be something other than we are?
Yes.
Why can't we just be?
That Paul will look the same no matter what their coffin is made of. Right.
That's right. I done buried a whole lot of folk. I've buried poor folk and rich folk.
Yeah.
And what? Same thing happens to everybody. I don't care how expensive the coffin is. I don't care what the mausoleum, if they're in a mausoleum or if they're in the ground. Everybody's going the same way. So it's time to get right with the Lord. Just get right with.
Amen. Thank you. Now, when we do need to get to your presiding bishop.
Oh, okay.
What? First of all, I'm going to ask you a question. How's your health? How are you doing?
Oh, much better. No, good. They've I got my little pacemaker and
Yeah.
got new heart meds, and they've taken care of the brain stuff and done all that work. And
Wonderful.
so I'm in good shape. They've took out adrenal gland. I feel like the bionic man. They've taken some stuff out, put some stuff in, and now I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. All those prayers of good folk have made it.
Mighty prayers, mighty prayers.
Sir. Yes, sir.
What did you see when you took the baton? No. Carried the shepherd's crook.
Mm-hmm.
What did you want to accomplish in the church?
Well, we were just coming out of years where, I was there. We were to have had a presiding bishop like Catherine Jefferts Shorey was an incredible blessing, because we were a church that was in great conflict over sexuality, court fights, property disputes. And even having grown up in this church, I didn't know if this church had the steel in it to, you know what I mean? Steel in its spine. Be able to face those kind of hard times. And when we elected Catherine Jefferts Shorey, we elected a woman. Well, all the Catherines throughout history that we know of, Catherines the Great, they are not people you mess with. They got spine. And our Catherine had spine and wisdom. And so she helped us get through just hard, difficult years for this church. And most of that work was done. She was able to complete most, there was still some work that needed to be done, but for the most part, most of that work was done. My sense was that maybe my task was to help the church now reclaim without embarrassment the faith that has been given to us. To not be ashamed to be followers of Jesus of Nazareth. To claim anew his teachings and his way of life and his way of love as our way of life. And to do that not arrogantly, but unapologetically. And that was basically my job, was to help the revival. Now that the swords and shields had been laid down, so to speak, it was time for revival. And then so that the next, because there's a next leg, but I'm not to do that one. You got to get another presiding bishop to do that one. The next leg can happen because there's a faith that we proclaim and believe.
Can I try a metaphor on you?
Yeah.
You restored equilibrium?
Say a little bit more.
Well, from a church that was not quite rendered asunder, but bordered on being rendered asunder.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
And that transition.
Sure.
She kept it together, but
yeah,
you restored the sense of calm and order.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that again,
there were no fundamental existential debates.
No.
Right.
I think you're right. I mean, there were really, in a sense, when everything has that. Ecclesiastes, I don't know if it's just because I'm getting old, but Ecclesiastes is seeming a lot wiser to me. There's a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die.
Amen.
And there is a lot of truth to that. And there is a time, and I often wondered why a time for war and a time for peace.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a time for sickness, a time for health. I mean, I've often wondered why in the world would Ecclesiastes, why would the preacher, why would he say that? And yet, the more I live, I am kind of realizing, for example, we all serve whatever our vocation happens to be for a season. We're not meant for, I mean, I love the movie A Man for All Seasons, but none of us are people for all seasons. There's a time when we are meant to be. And so that Bishop Catherine was the presiding bishop for that season. That season was a season of struggle, and where the church had to gird up its loins, and had to. And once it had done that and was now in a better place, then the question is, because there are hard days coming, there are hard days ahead.
I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, oh yeah, guaranteed. Just the nature of the way things are. So how do you face those kinds of hard times? You got to face them with Jesus. You got to face them with a God. You got to face them with a real God. With a like the hymn used to say, "Oh love that will not let me go, I rest my weary soul in thee, I give thee back the life I owe." A God who is the strong. There used to be a commercial when I was a kid. You may remember this. It was a Tide commercial. It said, "Stronger than dirt." A God love is stronger than dirt. And that's what. And then you can face the new, what the days that are ahead. There's another season ahead. And that season is where America is not the religious nation that it was when I was a kid. It's not. A time when churches will be smaller, synagogues smaller, mosques smaller, where the share of the religious population in the classic sense or organized sense will be smaller than it has been. I'm not sure the word secular, the secularizing of America is actually accurate anymore. It's not that simple. There is a spirituality, but it's not necessarily tied to organized religious faith.
Yeah.
And that's just a very different context to minister in and to be in. I'm not saying that it's bad, but it is profoundly different than what we're used to. And that's
Can I ask a question. Do you think that more all-encompassing notion of spirituality as opposed to being steeped in doctrine has left us room for the spate of amorality that we see, particularly in our nation and throughout the world, actually?
That's interesting. Oh. I am not sure. I mean, I want to ponder that. I can tell you this. We are living in a context in which amorality runs the risk, or in which our society runs the risk of self-centered amorality controlling our politics, our corporate life, and could threaten this very democracy itself.
Yes.
And that is a pernicious danger. And the church, people of faith, must stand up as people of unselfish values that seeks the good and the welfare of others, as well as the self, but seeks the good and welfare of others. This is a time when the parable of the Good Samaritan must rise anew among us, and only that way of living will save a country like this. When we see folk hurting and help, when we care about others as well as the self, that's love. See, that's what that's not love. This isn't sentimental stuff. This isn't my wife's soap operas. It's the Good Samaritan's about love.
Yes.
And living it. And if we don't live it, we'll pay for it.
You know, does the name Anna DeVere Smith mean anything to you?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Anna and I are good friends.
I met her years ago.
She's a Baltimore woman.
Yes. I met her in New York, but yeah.
She she was here giving a series of lectures on Sunday afternoons at the National Gallery.
Uh-huh.
And Anna, much like you, believes fundamentally in the dignity of every human being.
Yes. Yes.
She sees that now in such as being so under threat.
Yes.
And she turned very calmly to me after, during the course of a dinner we were having, and she said, "So where are we going to go?" It wasn't, should we? It wasn't, do you think we will have to? It was, where do we go? I haven't felt this kind of existential vulnerability
Yeah. Yeah.
my entire life, and I grew up in segregated America.
Yes. This is worse than that. This is more pernicious. It's I don't know that Dr. King fully, of course he couldn't have fully grasped his last book.
Why We Can't Wait?
Was that his last one? Okay, then maybe it was one but right before. But the one, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos.
Oh, where do we go from here? Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Why We Can't Wait, man, right before it. Anyway,
Yeah.
it was, but both of them are late.
Yeah.
And this would have been Where Do We Go From Here was like in the last year of his life, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And Where Do We Go From Here, chaos or community.
Yeah.
That was a prophetic statement, question that the answer was embedded in the question, but community might not happen.
Yeah.
And if the chaos rules, then it is the destruction of community,
Yeah.
life, and of civilization.
Yeah.
Now, I dare to hope that the book of Genesis is still true. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. It was just pure chaos. It was nothing. The chaos, nothingness. And God said, let there be light, and there was light.
And created order.
Chaos, created order. That first day, second day, third day, seventh. That's God. I still believe that old folk used to say, this is my father's world. And ultimately, chaos is not going to rule. But we can't rest on our laurels. We have got to do our part for this, to save this country, but frankly, to save this planet.
Save the planet.
As well as save the planet. Yes.
Right. These hot wars that are going on. Yes, we are human. Yes, we will always fight wars, but we won't wipe each other off the face of the earth. But Bishop, what we should make us shudder is what we're capable of doing to each other as we take ourselves to the brink of annihilation.
That's right.
And that's why we have to stop. Well, I want to get now. I know Amanda's here because she's going to pull the plug.
I see her.
We're about at our limit. Maybe one more quick question.
Oh no! All right.
We have to get to another thing.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Thank you. I got it.
All right.
So
What did you not accomplish that you wanted to while you were presiding bishop?
Oh, as presiding bishop. I mean, I in all honesty, and I don't mean this to sound simplistic. I really do think my calling was to ignite the fires of a revival that would feed the church for the days that are ahead of it, that would feed the Christian movement for the days that are ahead of it. I think, I mean, time will tell, but I think that was my job. And I wouldn't have said it that way 10 years or 9 years ago, but looking back, I think that was the task. And
Okay, so Amanda, give me 30 seconds here. She's not happy.
you know what Amanda looks like now? She looks like the, you know, the angel with the sword
I know.
at the Garden of Eden. All right, you guys are gonna get kicked out of the garden.
Right. Was there anything you expected me to ask you that I did not, and that you want to put on the record?
You know, no. You know, I have been blessed. I believe in God, that this God is for real. And, you know, ministry for me has not been easy. Being presiding bishop has not been easy. Being a bishop and being has not been easy. What the Langston Hughes poem from Mother to Son, life for me ain't been no crystal stairway.
Yeah.
But I'm still climbing. I'm still climbing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I learned that poem as a little boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why the old folk taught us those poems, but I think so that when you're 71, you'll remember and understand it better.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
I believe there's a God, and I believe that together with our God and with each other, we can change the world for the better.
Amen. This has been such a blessing for me. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're a wonderful conversation partner.
Oh, I've had a ball. I'm sure you can tell.
I'm
not going to get Amanda all mad at me, so I'm leaving right now. Thank you both so very much.
Riley, what a delight.
Thank you, Riley.
Yes, indeed.
Take good care.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
What do we do?